I'm Bill Kennedy. I'm chairman of the Jonesborough Historic Zoning Commission and have been on the commission since 1980. I became involved with the Eureka Inn in 1997 when a group of us put together a partnership to buy the inn and attempt to restore it, primarily as a preservation project. The history of the inn goes back to 1797, just 18 years after Jonesborough was founded and laid out. When they first laid out the town in 1779, the leaders of Jonesborough, at that time called the town's commission, distributed 1-acre lots, according to the town plat, to individuals who agreed to develop each lot to minimum standards. And those standards were very nicely defined. 18 years later, they found that some of the lots had not been developed, and also ownership of some of the lots was not really known, was not a matter of public record, because even though they had records of the original recipients of the lots, many of those lots had changed hands, and there had been no established means of registering deeds for those lots as we know today and as we have today. Therefore, in 1797, the commissioners called together all of the people who owned various lots in town and had them gather and register actual deeds, written statements of their ownership of the lots. They inspected their lots, and they repossessed lots that had not been developed and then sold them. It was at that time that Robert Mitchell bought the lot now that holds the Eureka Inn, and bought it for a little over $80, according to the earliest deed that we have in writing in the lot. He then built his home on the corner, which is now the oldest part of the inn, which is the corner part of the inn on First Avenue and Main Street. The characteristics of the construction are consistent with the period of 1797 to the early 1800s. Then we know from tracing the deeds and from looking at insurance maps, Sanborn maps, that the home continued to be a private home until 1900, when Peter Miller and his wife bought it and developed it into the Eureka Hotel. They continued to operate the inn until 1910, when they sold it to the Russells, and it became the Hotel Russell, or the Russell Hotel, until 1922. In 1922, Squire Gresham bought the inn from the Russells and continued to operate it in his family during the ensuing few decades of the middle part of the 20th century. Unfortunately, by the time of the Depression and then continuing into World War II and after World War II, the inn gradually declined, known at that time as the Gresham Hotel, continuing to have food service, a restaurant of various kinds on the ground floor, and continuing to have rentable rooms on the second floor, but the rooms were not kept up to date and became short-term rooms for itinerant travelers and short-term residents in very much a declined condition after the Second World War. By the time of the birth of the preservation effort in Jonesborough in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the old Gresham Hotel, as it was known by then, was rapidly declining and became such a derelict property by the 1990s that we took steps to enforce our ordinance against demolition by neglect against its owner, by that time Tom Johnson, who was Buddy Gresham's son, who had inherited the hotel from his father. Tom was not able to maintain the hotel in a way that was suitable either to the town or to his own standards, and eventually, through the urging of his wife Renee, sold the property to a partnership that we put together, we called Renaissance Properties, in 1997. During the first year and a half after we bought the property in 1997, we carefully disassembled the property enough, the building enough to assess its structural integrity. We opened the cavity of every wall, every cavity of every wall, to assess the structural integrity and to give us access not only to the structure but also for badly needed updating of wiring and safety features and modern communication features. And after that thorough planning, during the first year and a half of the 3-year period that it took us to restore the inn, we then reassembled the building and opened it in the summer of 2000 as the current historic Eureka Inn. I don't know whether this is going to be interesting or not, but let's go ahead and do it. You can always cut, right?
Yes, digital tape is inexpensive.
Yeah. Why don't we just talk about this right here? This section of the building was added by Peter Miller when he expanded the previous home into the Eureka Hotel. This door was an entrance to what was known as the sample room. Traveling salesmen could rent the room behind this pair of doors and set up exhibits for their wares and also entertain their customers in the room that was known as the sample room. We wanted to keep that entranceway closed because we needed to build hotel rooms behind it, but we wanted to keep it on the exterior so that it would tell the story of the sample room, and so one of the rooms behind it is called the sample room. That, to us, has a lot of historic significance, and to the extent that we can, we have maintained those signs of historical significance and previous uses throughout the inn. Peter Miller's section of the hotel in 1900 stopped at this corner, which meant, as you can see down to my right, the thickness or the depth of this part of the building was not very large. That was room enough only for a set of bedrooms. We got to the bedrooms on the second floor by going out onto the porch at that time. And of course, as I've just mentioned, on the ground floor, that entire space was occupied by the sample room. When the Russells bought the hotel in 1910, they added this wing to the left, which gave room not only for connecting the Peter Miller's section of the east end of the hotel on the interior, but also gave room for another pair of rooms, one on the second floor and the other on the ground floor, on this particular east end of the inn. This is a good view for Peter Miller's addition to the back of the inn. You can see the change in the slope of the siding, and where that change occurred was where Peter Miller added his addition behind when he converted the home into the hotel. His addition was not as strong as the original 1797 to 1799 home, and so of course it settled, as we can see just looking down at the change in the slope of the siding. And then let's go across the street. When Peter Miller opened the Eureka Hotel in 1900, he added the present front porch, but he did not add the dormers. When the Russells bought the building from Peter Miller in 1910, they added the 3 dorms that you see on the front of the building. Peter Miller also added the chimneys that we can see, the 3 chimneys, which we've restored. we were able to restore parts of the porch that were missing by the time we bought the building based on a picture of the building with Peter Miller standing in front of it that was made apparently shortly after he opened the Eureka Hotel. And we use that in our materials, use it in our brochures today. That was very important for us to accurately restore the columns on the ground floor level beneath the porch and various details of the building itself so that they could be restored to their original style. Here is a door on the west end of the back porch of the inn, which doesn't have any steps to it and doesn't seem to lead anywhere. But it's another example of a part of the inn that we felt tells a story, and we wanted to keep it. This was the entrance for black people during the period of segregation. African Americans could enter the back porch at lunchtime, go through a buffet line, get their lunch, and sit down on the back porch or take their lunch off of the back porch somewhere else and eat it. During the period of segregation, when they were not allowed to enter into the front door of the Gresham Hotel, as it was called at that time, and eat with white people in the hotel's dining room. And we felt that keeping that door was important to continue to tell the story of the period of segregation in our country. When we bought the building, a remnant of the original back porch was still here, which was in terrible condition, and of course we had to completely rebuild the back porch. So far as we could tell, the inn did not previously have a second floor porch on the back, but we built that, of course, for the use of our guests and in order to give us a fire escape off of the second floor. The back section to my left, closest to the side street, is the part that was added by Peter Miller and later further expanded by the Russells in 1900 and 1922. The Russells added the wing to my right to expand the hotel to the back. When we bought the hotel, there also was a very much weakened and run-down garage that probably, based on its design, had been built in the 1920s to accommodate a Model A, and also had a second story to it that appeared to have been used as a pantry for the kitchen of the hotel. That building had not been well built in the first place and was in very bad condition, and so we demolished it with the permission, of course, of the Historic Zoning Commission, which is the commission that must approve any changes to any of the exteriors of any of the properties here in our historic district. The Historic Zoning Commission was established here in Jonesborough in 1970 when the town of Jonesborough passed its historic zoning ordinance. So what you see of the town of Jonesborough now in the central business district and in the surrounding residential areas is as a result of 40 years of historic preservation on a community basis with the full support and backing of the local municipal government. We found that the town was really dying in the 1960s and early 1970s, and the forefathers of the town, the leaders of the town in the late 1960s and 1970s, integrated historic preservation in an overall plan that was needed to improve infrastructure such as water and sewer and police protection and fire safety. And the town that we have today as a thriving small town, Tennessee's oldest town, is the result of all of that effort combined with the work of many property owners who have joined in the effort and who love this little town. As you can tell, I tell this story very regularly.
Well, you do seem to have it down, and I appreciate that.
Let's go upstairs. It's really easier to see the growth of the building upstairs.
Yeah, that's where I watch it.
And I guess she's got the rooms open that we can go into, does she?
Yeah.
And they have this gadget, it's called
Let's go on the front porch first. How about that? I love this front porch. It's just high enough off of the street that I can really look up and down Main Street and see what's going on and hear what's going on. It's also close enough to the street that I have that feeling of intimacy with the street while still being somewhat removed from the street. This is one of my favorite spots in Jonesborough because I can see all the way 2 blocks up Main Street to the west, and I can see, particularly in cooler weather when the leaves are off the trees, up to the opposite hill on the east end of Main Street. The rail back in 1900 and earlier was set this low on purpose because this was a sitting porch, and the idea was that you should be able to sit on the porch and enjoy looking over the rail. It's a very different philosophy from our present philosophy of making the rail at least 42 inches high so that people are safer when they're standing and walking. We simply warn our guests that the rail is low, and many of our guests thoroughly enjoy this front porch, as I do when I can sit out here. Back during the time when Peter Miller had this open as his hotel, the Eureka Hotel, a guest had to walk out on this porch in order to enter the bedrooms on the east end of the hotel. There was a room behind this window and a room behind that window, and here where you can see the break in the siding, there was an entrance through which the guests entered a little anteroom and then went into their respective rooms. Their rooms were isolated from the rest of the hotel. There was no inside connection until later when the Russells bought the hotel and expanded it in 1910.
What were the bathing, bathroom facilities?
We're going to talk about that. So we'll get to that next. I think to show this. When we bought the hotel in 1997, we found 2 bathing facilities on the second floor. No, 3. 3 bathing facilities on the second floor and 1 bathing facility on the ground floor. This was one of the bathing facilities on the second floor. Off of the central hall, you could enter through that door, which we've now converted into a closet, and go into a toilet room and lavatory. And you could enter into this door, which now leads into a bedroom, and go into a shower room. The partition inside the shower room and the toilet room only extended to about 7 feet. The ceiling in the room was the existing approximately 9 feet. This meant that there was no sound control. There was open space between the top of the partition of the toilet room and the shower room without any sound control and without any ventilation control right into the bedroom behind these 2 facilities, which was the cook's room. In the area that we have now converted into a bathroom, there was a stair that went down to the kitchen. And so this room that we're in now, behind the shower room and the toilet room that opened into the hall, was the cook's room. She had direct access to the kitchen by this stair that was where this bathroom is now. Can you imagine the crudeness of having guests with no sound control, no ventilation control, using the toilet room and the shower adjacent to the cook's room with only a short partition, not even extending to the ceiling, between the cook's room and those more public facilities. You'll need to get this down in this direction. One of the 3 bathing facilities on the second floor of the hotel when we bought it in 1997 was what we have affectionately called the tub room. This was a partition that came out into the hall a few feet and then down the hall in this direction, and in front of this window right here was a toilet room with a lavatory. The partition then went with a door where I'm standing now to give access to the toilet room, and in the longer part of this partitioned off area in what is now the hallway there was a tub, a clawfoot tub. The partition providing privacy for the clawfoot tub and for the toilet room was this partition right here. We have kept it and simply mounted it on this wall. It only went this high. There was a private entrance into the tub room right about here from the adjacent bedroom. The wall, the door to the adjacent bedroom, which we now call the tub room, was around the corner from us. But again, we had a situation here in which neither the toilet room nor the tub room were really partitioned off from the rest of the hotel from the point of view of sound control or ventilation control. And of course, they didn't have the type of ventilation systems that we have now. But we kept this partition and mounted it on this wall as an ornament purely because it tells the story that I just told you of what we have come to call the tub room. And so this marvelous bedroom behind it, which is now a fully modern, very comfortable bedroom, we simply call the tub room, with its completely modern and beautifully decorated attached private bathroom. This bedroom we call the jury room is the largest room in the inn. We now have it outfitted that it can accommodate 5 people. The reason we call it the jury room is that tradition has it that particularly during the 19-teens and the 1920s, this was where jurymen were sequestered. As many as 12 men may have served on the jury, and of course at that time women did not serve on juries. So if the jury needed to be sequestered, there were available a total of 12 cots in this room, and the bailiff or the deputy sheriff or whoever was keeping guard of the jurymen to make sure they obey all the rules could put a cot just outside the room, and of course the juryman could go down the hall as anyone who was a guest could to use the shower room or the toilet room that I mentioned a few minutes ago and showed you. Can you imagine 12 men sleeping in this room, or trying to sleep in this room at one time while being sequestered in jury duty? On the front porch we have 12 chairs, 1 chair as a memorial for each juryman that may have had to spend the night from time to time in this room with 11 other men. This spot on the wall marks the border between Robert Mitchell's original home, which runs from here to the front of the building and on the street side of the central hallway, and the addition to the rear on the west side, southwest side of the inn that was added by Peter Miller. This partition was a single plank partition. That was all the thickness that we found when we bought the building. These planks are tongue and groove planks, and they're beaded with one bead on the edge of each board. Nice wide boards that go all the way to the ceiling, that were anchored into the ceiling and also into the floor. But there was no more thickness in the wall than that. And that was a style that was characteristic of partition construction in the late 18th century, 1790s, and in the early part of the 19th century until around probably 1820. By that time, the more typical construction that we're accustomed to now, at least in this part of the country, became a lot more common. This was another example in which we wanted to keep the character of the beaded boards, tongue and groove boards, as a memorial for that style of construction that was here originally in 1800 and continuing on through the entire part of the 19th century and on into the 20th century. We simply removed these boards long enough to build a modern partition behind them to meet modern needs of sound control and safety, and fire safety. And then we mounted these boards back on the wall as an ornament and as a memorial. The same is true for the ceiling. We've kept the plank ceilings in the hallway and also in the jury room by simply mounting the boards back onto the modern ceiling after having built the modern ceiling.
So how old are these planks?
Well, the ones that are original, and we did have to replace a few of them, and we did have to reproduce a few of them, but the ones that are original, we believe, go back to about 1800 when Robert Mitchell built this as his home.
And what type of wood is this?
It's poplar. And these wide plank boards are poplar too, most likely, in that we had huge poplar trees at that time and on through most of the 19th century. And most of the interior woodwork was done with poplar. The ceiling boards may be pine, but I really think they most likely are also poplar. One of the processes of the adaptive reuse and the restoration that we did in order to outfit the building for modern use, for lodging, we had to open every cavity of every wall throughout the entire building on at least one side of each wall in order to evaluate the structure and in order to put in the necessary modern wiring and safety features. In this particular wall on the staircase, there was plaster, which is somewhat rough, that we thought probably dated from the Gresham period, probably the middle of the 20th century, that was in good enough condition for us to keep it. But most of the plaster was badly deteriorated because for decades there had been no control of moisture or humidity in the building, and certainly no control of temperature. So we removed the plaster, we removed all of the woodwork. We labeled each piece of woodwork after having done a drawing of the building, of each floor, and labeled each room, giving it a particular number. We labeled each piece of woodwork, including each door, and stored them out in back of the building in a tractor trailer that we rented for about a year and a half. And during the summer of 1998, we set up a system out in the backyard, as it was then, what presently is the garden and patio area, and actually washed all of the woodwork, keeping the labels on them, which we had inscribed the labels on pieces of metal and actually had attached them, fastened them soundly to each piece of woodwork. And then as we reassembled the building during the reconstruction period primarily of 1999, we brought each piece of woodwork back and put it back exactly where we had found it initially, and that way kept the various styles inside the building, so that currently you can go through the building if you're knowledgeable of the styles of around 1800 as opposed to the middle part of the 19th century and as opposed to 1900 and then still later in 1910. You can actually read the building, so to speak, by looking at the style of the woodwork and the style of the construction, and see without my having to tell you which part of the building was built in which period of time. When the Russells bought the building, they apparently covered the entire outside of the building with the present siding. So it's not as clear on the outside of the building as it is on the inside of the building. But again, we wanted to continue to have the building tell its own story by preserving and replacing precisely where each piece of woodwork belonged as we reassembled the building, having taken it apart. In our disassembly part of the building, as we evaluated the condition of the construction of the building, we then reinforced all of the partitions necessary, and we added a total of 17 additional piers beneath the building in order to shore up the floor system and the walls of the building in reinforcing it to get it ready for modern use and modern occupancy. We also thoroughly insulated all of the walls between each of the bedrooms, and the exterior walls we insulated with foam insulation that we cut pieces of foam to fit into each of the cavities and then caulked around each piece of foam into the studs of the walls in order to, on the one hand, permit the exterior siding to continue to breathe and have some ventilation, which it needs for preservation of the siding, but in order to control the temperature and to control sound from outside to make this as quiet an inn as possible. We didn't spare any means or take any shortcuts in trying to make this a thoroughly comfortable inn to meet all of the needs that any modern guest would expect and enjoy. Oh, here's one other point. As we removed the plaster from the walls that we had to remove, we found many layers of wallpaper in various parts of the building, including wallpaper on the ceilings, which was customary during the 19th century. Because of the moisture conditions in the building and the deterioration of the plaster, we found that the wallpaper was very easy to remove and relatively easy to separate one layer of paper from another. So we collected large samples of each of the papers that we found in the building. We labeled each sample that we kept as to where we had found it, whether it was on a wall or a ceiling, and which room it was in, and even which wall of which room. And we mounted those samples of paper on a total of about 75 shrink boards, acid-free boards wrapped in shrink wrap. And then when we got ready to determine the interior design of the hotel, we spread all those papers out and spent a considerable amount of time in a large conference room going from one paper to the other and identifying the styles of the various papers. We did not go to the expense of actually reproducing any of the papers, but we let those papers tell us the general styles of the 19th century, particularly in the early part of the 20th century, that had been used in decorating and furnishing the hotel when it was in its prime, and when it had been used as a private home. And we used that as the basis upon which to furnish the inn and also choose the window treatments and the wall coverings that we've used in the present inn restoration.
Who did your in this recent renovation? Who's your designer?
Mary Powell, who's one of our partners. For the restoration of the inn, we put together a partnership that included me in doing the preservation part of it, our mayor and her husband, Toby and Baxter Bledsoe. They were the innkeepers, and their daughter is currently the innkeeper, Maria. The town administrator, Bob Browning, was one of our partners. Also, a real estate businessman, Steve Bacon, is one of our partners. And finally, Mary Powell, our interior designer, is one of our partners. So each person in the partnership had a particular role to play for the development of this restored and rehabilitated historic Eureka Inn.